Hey all, I guess first of all thanks for checking out the video. It's the first video of its kind that I've made, so if you have any feedback or you want to let me know what you thought about it or anything you disagree with, then feel free to let me know in the comments, but otherwise I hope it's useful. I basically set out with the task of creating a lightning storm druid. Originally there wasn't a lightning build on Maxroll. And so initially I set out to kind of fill that gap. Whilst I was creating mine, one did appear, but it's a werewolf lightning build anyway. And part of my goal for this build was to make a human-centric one, so like a human elementalist, and also that means that people can play it without needing the Tempest Raw unique helm. And it's just something a bit different. I'm not affiliated with Maxroll in any way. I am going to be showing you the build using their website. It's the D4 planner that they made is excellent, and the website in general is good. They're adding a lot of new features. They've just added a new world map, and a lot of the people on here making builds are at the top of their game. So definitely check out the website if you're not familiar with it anyway. I'll probably leave a link to my build in their planner in the description anyway, so maybe you'll find some other stuff on there if you weren't familiar with it already. In terms of how powerful the build is, I did a lot of testing with it where I was sort of level 79, level 80, and I was pushing mid 40 nightmare tiers of dungeons, so the enemies were anywhere between like 17 and 20 levels higher than me, and I was still managing to complete the dungeons in 5 minutes or so, as you can see in this clip. I've actually got another clip for you which I'll show you later on, which is a cursed shrine, or a cursed health well, I think it is actually, and I can just show you kind of how fast we can clear like entire rooms even with that kind of level of discrepancy between our level and theirs. One thing that's worth noting when fighting bosses or big elites with Lightning Storm is that if you spam the button rather than holding it down, you can keep the area of effect narrower and do more precise damage that way. Cool, so let's look at the skill tree together then. So for the basic skill, we've taken Storm Strike. This is just an excellent spirit generator. You gain 25% damage reduction for 3 seconds after dealing damage with it, which is just a really consistent way to buff your damage reduction. You get a chance to immobilize enemies, and if we take the Fierce Storm Strike, we get a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. This is good for a number of things. If you're getting unlucky with getting vulnerable up, you can very easily control where you apply vulnerable to, so for big packs of elites or bosses, very useful. The other option for your basic skill would be Wind Shear. If I was going to take Wind Shear, I would take the Fierce Wind Shear for the increased movement speed, and I might consider that if I was looking to speed farm or something like that, but personally I think the damage reduction and basically being able to control putting up 25% damage reduction and very easily control applying vulnerable to big targets is just a winner for me. In the core skill section, obviously Lightning Storm, it's kind of the iconic thing that we're building the whole build around here, so it makes sense that we've chosen that one. And then I've chosen the Primal Lightning Storm as the final node. I don't think Raging Lightning Storm is worth it personally. There's one additional Lightning Strike. We've got enough Lightning Strikes in this build in my opinion, but getting the 12% chance to immobilize enemies is just better, I think. A lot of the build is based around dealing damage to slowed, immobilized, stunned, crowd controlled enemies essentially. So I've taken 1 point in Heart of the Wild, which allows me to put 3 points into Wild Impulses for the increased damage. I've put 3 points into Predatory Instinct for the crit strike chance against enemies, close enemies specifically. In the defensive section, I've taken a point in Earthen Bulwark, and I've gone all the way through to Preserving Earthen Bulwark for the Fortify. That's going to be our main source of Fortify in this build. I've taken 1 point in Cyclone Armor, and I've taken Innate Cyclone Armor, which basically applies Vulnerable to any enemies knocked back when we trigger the Cyclone Armor. This, I think, is the best choice here, because we can just use it to really consistently apply Vulnerable to targets again. So if we get into big packs of elites, or just big packs of mobs in general, we can just knock them all back and apply Vulnerable, and then just go crazy with our AoE lightning. I'll explain a bit more about that when I get a bit further down the tree and we start talking about Hurricane. But yeah, that's the choice there for now. I've taken 1 point in Ancestral Fortitude to allow me to take 3 points in Vigilance. Vigilance just gives us 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. In this build we're using Cyclone Armor and Earthen Bulwark, which are both considered defensive skills. So it just means that we have that extra damage reduction up a lot of the time, basically, which is great. In the companion skill section, I haven't taken anything except for the 3 points into Nature's Reach, which gives us increased damage to distant enemies, and this will actually be doubled if those enemies are slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So again, you can kind of see where that ties in with what I was saying earlier. And the combination of Predatory Instinct and Nature's Reach just means that we are basically able to deal more damage regardless where they are on our screen, which is great. In the Wrath skills section, I've taken Hurricane, and again the final node choice here is similar to the final node choice on Cyclone Armor. So Cyclone Armor is vulnerable or damage reduction, and Hurricane is damage reduction or vulnerable. So you could have them both be vulnerable, you could have them both apply vulnerable, or you could have them both apply damage reduction. The reason I've got them this way around, again, is about consistency for me. So Savage Hurricane, all enemies affected by Hurricane deal 20% less damage. Hurricane is a big, swirling pool of wind around you. It does hit a lot of enemies, so again, very consistent damage reduction. Whereas you'll see that the difference here is Hurricane has a 15% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. Again, it's not bad, but it's just not as consistent. And the same thing then applies to kind of Cyclone Armor. So with the innate Cyclone Armor, I guarantee that all those people knocked back are going to be vulnerable. Whereas with the Preserving Cyclone Armor, every 10 seconds you get an increase in damage reduction, essentially. So ultimately, if you feel you want to try changing these, or you do want to change them, then feel free. But personally, I liked the control that I had with innate Cyclone Armor and Savage Hurricane. Cool. After that, I took 2 points in Elemental Exposure, which is again just a lucky hit chance to get more enemies vulnerable. I took 1 point in Endless Tempest, which increases the duration of Hurricane and Cataclysm. If I had more points to spend, I probably would spend them here. If nothing else, just for the increased Cataclysm duration. But I didn't feel like I had them to spare, so I've taken 3 points in Bad Omen, which again is increasing our damage to immobilized, stunned, and vulnerable, and 3 points in Electric Shock, which is giving us an increased chance to immobilize and deal more damage to them if they are. So again, you can see it. It's a real theme in this build. If I come down to the ultimate skills section, I've chosen Cataclysm here. This is just a really good skill to be able to press when we've got kind of big enemies that we need to fight, like elites or bosses. You won't have any issue whatsoever with big packs of just general mobs. And honestly, you won't have too much of an issue with elites or bosses either, but I think this just is an extra thing that helps. It adds a lot of damage and vulnerable chance, so always useful. And I take both points in this for the increased duration and the vulnerability. I take 3 points in Defiance for the increased damage to elites, and I take 3 points in Natural Disaster for the increased storm skill damage specifically. And 3 points in defensive posture for the increased amount of fortify that we gain from any source, and 3 points in Nature's Resolve for basically a chance to gain fortify when we're struck by mobs. For the key passives, this kind of gets a bit debatable. There are people who think that the Earthen Might key passive is better if you get the aspect that allows you to allows it to apply to storm skills, basically. I still prefer Perfect Storm. I think it's more consistent spirit regen, it's more consistent damage. I would definitely use this for like speed farming for sure. It's what I've chosen as my default. I do think there's a like a valid argument for using the Earthen Might with the aspect. Obviously, there's a few cons to that. Obviously, it does take up another aspect slot, which is one thing. You get higher overall damage and higher crits, but you become more reliant on lucky hit. So if you had kind of the idealized gear, then maybe this would be much more worth considering. For me and the character that I had, I didn't feel that this was beneficial. I actually felt that this held me back quite a lot. For the Spirit Boons, in the Stag tier, you can see I've gone for Wariness. It's 10% reduction, damage reduction from elites. That just makes sense. It's just that for me, it's the best one here by a mile. In the Eagle tier, I've taken the 5% increased crit strike chance. You could take the crit strike damage, but personally, I felt that I got more benefit out of the chance here. For the Wolf tier, I've taken Calamity, which extends the duration of ultimate skills. In this case, for me, it is Cataclysm. In the Snake tier, you can see that I've taken Overload for the increased lightning damage to surrounding enemies, and Calm Before the Storm, which just gives us a chance to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate, allowing us to keep Cataclysm up more and more frequently. A lot of people may wonder why I've gone Earthen Bulwark and Cataclysm rather than, say Grizzly Rage, and something else. Grizzly Rage is great. They obviously use it in the Werewolf Tornado builds, and I think a lot of the Werewolf variation builds. It makes sense because they're combining it with the aspect to turn your Werebear into a Werewolf for a start, which we're not doing in this build. And I've focused this build around being in human form. When we start talking about the Paragon board, you'll see that we get more damage for being in human form. And ultimately, we just didn't want to keep shifting into the bear form and having to pulverize and then not being able to use our Lightning Storm. So that's kind of why we haven't used that here. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the Paragon board and some of the choices there. So obviously we always get the starting board. I've actually chosen to put the human glyph in here. Bear in mind that with my Paragon board the way it is, these glyphs are leveled up to 21, which means they get their full radius and their full increases to their effects. And maybe whilst you're kind of leveling up, you'll want to prioritize the most efficient route to get the most glyphs possible rather than completely copying what I've done here. This is essentially, it's expecting for you to have all the points by this stage. So feel free to adapt it and try stuff out. Don't take my word for it. If you think you can do something better, as I said, let me know. So I've chosen the human glyph in here, and I've been able to get 92.4% additional damage whilst in human form and 10% damage reduction whilst in human form, which is perfect for us because, as I've said already, the goal of this was to not shapeshift and to stay in human form all the time. So that's a lot of extra damage and damage reduction, which is great. I'm not going to go through every single node because we'd be here for a very long time. I can call out some of the more important nodes, the prime nodes, and the legendary nodes, as well as the glyph, and kind of explain some of the choices. So I've kind of gone up this right hand side and I've grabbed the prime rare node here. That's obviously 20% more damage and 4% maximum life, which is excellent. pick the human glyph, as I said, and for this one we want to get as much willpower as possible. So you can see, all these nodes here that I've travelled to. Like, why did he go down there? It's because I'm looking for the extra willpower to keep buffing that glyph. Essentially, if I was to take out some of that willpower, this website's great. It's showing us that there's another node that we could use to optimize what we're getting. So you can see now I've just taken out that one willpower node. The contribution is significantly less, and now we're only doing 85.8 damage. So yeah, we try and get as much as possible there. Sometimes it will be a bit of a balance. You won't be able to get literally everything you want. So figuring out the best route is kind of key, and that's essentially what I've done. Well, to the best of my ability. I've come up here and grabbed the Resolve rare node. The main reason for this, the resistance to all elements is nice. But the main reason I've done that is for the plus 10 willpower. Again, if I was to go without that, all of a sudden I drop down 79%. So, definitely worth doing. The Impel node here, it's just more damage and more willpower. It's a no-brainer. So cool, I've moved on to the next board. I've chosen to put the Thunderstruck board in space 2 with this kind of rotation, so the glyph in the top right and the legendary node in the bottom left. I've come across here and I've grabbed the Tempest node for the crit strike and vulnerable damage. If you've been watching the rest of this video, you know how I feel about those. They're pretty good. And then I've grabbed all these magic nodes around, which are doing kind of the same thing. More crit strike damage, more vulnerable damage. Excellent, love those. I've grabbed the legendary node, Thunderstruck. Storm skills deal 30% increased crit strike against vulnerable or immobilized enemies. It's everything we've ever dreamed of. It's just we need that one. Can't avoid it. I've gone up towards the glyph now via the Deluge rare node. 30% crit strike damage. Just flat across the board, and then 15% damage to crowd controlled enemies. It's another one you can see what we're doing with this. It's we've talked about it a lot now. We're just trying to maximize vulnerable damage and damaging any kind of crowd controlled enemy essentially. I've also taken all of these magic nodes. I felt that I could. If you feel like you can't, then feel free to take some out, put some nodes elsewhere. For this board, I ummed and ahed about this a lot, and I changed back and forth between some of the different glyphs. I've ended up with the Earth and Sky glyph in here. The Earth and Sky glyph is one of those glyphs that is affected by what board you put it in. So if I put it into the Thunderstruck board, it gains Storm skill damage. But if I put it into the Earth and Devastation board up there, for example, it doesn't have the Storm skill damage as part of the glyph, and it just has like dexterity and stuff. I can show you that in a second, but for now we'll just talk about kind of what this has given us. So obviously 22% Storm skill damage, a bit of extra dexterity, and a bit of reduction from vulnerable enemies. On top of that though, it's got this nature magic skills deal 10% increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. Again, nature magic skills, if we look at these spells, they're all classed as nature magic skills. So our lightning storm is considered a nature magic skill. So our lightning storm is going to be dealing increased damage to crowd controlled enemies and vulnerable enemies, which is again our main aim with this build. I've come across to grab the Hubris node here for again the additional willpower, and the damage reduction from vulnerable enemies is nice too. And then after that, I've gathered as much willpower here as possible to buff this glyph as much as possible. I've come up for the Stormcaller node for the extra storm skill and willpower again, and again I've gathered the magic nodes around it for the additional storm skills damage. For the third board, I've got the Ancestral Guidance. I have chosen to rotate it in such a way as the glyph is on the right hand side, and we kind of go very straight up through this. We don't sort of deviate too much. We do pop out to get the Ancestral Guidance, the legendary node. After spending 75 spirit, you deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. That's nice. We grab the Reclamation node here for mostly for the spirit on kill. to be honest. It helps us a lot with our sort of resource management, as do these nodes here. So 1 spirit on kill, maximum spirit, and 1 spirit on kill there. I chose not to take the additional one there because I wanted to use the node somewhere else, but again, feel free to play with this as you feel fit. And next one I grab is the spiritual powers, so 28% core skill damage and 35% basic skill damage. Core skill damage, buffing that is obviously going to make sense to us, and therefore we've grabbed the magic nodes to do the same. Again, lightning storm, core skill, so makes sense. In this board I've put the exploit glyph. It's 30% additional vulnerable damage, which we love, and you know, is one of the most powerful types of damage in the game. Well, one of the most powerful types of ways to increase your damage in the game, let's put it that way. So yeah, couldn't deal without that one, and I've also picked up the Harmony node for, again, additional core skill, and the willpower. The willpower is less important here actually because it's a dex glyph, so you can see we've mostly prioritized getting the dex nodes here, but I've mostly gathered the Harmony node for the core skill damage. Above us, I've taken the Constricting Tendrils board. Now, this might seem like an odd choice. I tried a lot of different boards. Again, if you think you've got a better way to do this, then definitely hit me up, let me know. However, I thought this was a pretty efficient way to use nodes and get us onto our 5th board. I rotated it in such a way that the glyph is down the bottom left. Ideally, if I'd had more nodes, I probably would have looked to pick up the legendary node on this, which would have given us a lucky hit chance to have like entangling vines come up around enemies, which would have dealt additional poison damage, and then we could have maybe looked into some of the other stats, like taking less damage from poisoned enemies and dealing more damage to poisoned enemies, which is more along the lines of what they do with the werewolf tornado style builds. I think it's excellent choice. I'm planning to try out one of those builds when with the Tempest Roar myself. But for what I was trying to achieve here, which was maximum damage as a human, I just felt I didn't have the nodes to get there. What I have done though is I've picked up the I've put the Fulminate glyph in this board, and this is a dex. It's powered by dex essentially. We need to get all the dex nodes within range of it, and I was able to get 97% lightning damage and an additional 12% increase to healthy and injured enemies, which, you know, pretty much enemies are always going to be healthy or injured. So massive increase there. I've come down here to pick up the maximum life and willpower. Now obviously with this being a dex node, we could argue I didn't need the willpower, but you can see actually what I'm doing is coming for these magic nodes here, so for the extra dex. And there's also the Nature's Will node here, which is just more Nature's magic skill damage, and these magic nodes which I've taken. You can see I haven't taken these magic nodes because they're intelligence. It's not really a core stat to us, and it's not powering the glyph in any way, so we don't really need that. I did come right on this board as well and take the Devastation node for more, increases to nature magic skill damage and damage to elites, and then also the additional kind of magic nodes here. It seems a little inefficient because you're sort of going this way and then stopping dead, but I think the additional damage here is worth it myself. And then obviously I'm coming out of this board to the left, and I've placed down the Earthen Devastation board, which I've got the Spirit Glyph inside, which I can get more damage out of the Spirit Glyph if I put it into a different board, but this seemed to be the best place for it by my calculations. I'm getting 57.4 crit strike damage with core skills out of it here, and it's increasing the damage that the enemy takes from me. I can show you in a second why I was umming and ahhing about this for a long time, but before I do, we'll talk about kind of the additional stuff that we've taken here. So we've taken some of these nodes. A lot of those are for the to allow us the access to the dexterity, and also to allow us to go up here and pick up the oppress node, which further increases our damage to crowd controlled enemies, and our crit strike to them as well, and some of the magic nodes. Again, if I'd had more points, maybe I would have taken these 2 nodes as well. Maybe you would prefer to sacrifice some from somewhere else to put them up there, but certainly this is what I've got for now. And just to sort of show you what I meant, I'm going to take the spirit glyph out of this board, and I'm going to take the earth and sky glyph out of the thunderstruck board. If I pop the spirit gem in, the spirit glyph inside there, you can see that this is now offering 77% crit strike damage with core skills instead of the 57. So you might say, well, Tobias, why don't we have that here then? Again, as I said, the earth and sky glyph, it stops getting the additional benefits from not being in the thunderstruck board essentially. So you can see here it's no longer doing storm skill damage. It will still do the increased damage to vulnerable if you meet its requirements. It makes the requirements of this willpower rather than dex. So you can see here there's these are showing green on this website to indicate to me that I'm not optimally filling it out. But as I say, it then misses the storm skill damage, and it doesn't seem as worth it to me. We could look at some others, like Territorial, for example, which provides damage to close enemies, or Undaunted is quite good as well, which is sort of damage while fortified. Again, it's not showing very optimally there, it's only 9%, but that's because I haven't picked all these intelligence nodes out. I decided that I was going to stick with Earth and Sky over here, and Spirit over there. As I say, if you do some more testing and you think that could be changed, feel free to let me know below in the comments. But yeah, so that's a bit about the Paragon board. Hopefully that's helpful. Alright, cool. Let's talk about stat priorities and aspects. I've made this sheet. I'll try and make it available as a PDF just so that you can have easy access. You don't need to keep referring back to the video if you just want to have it quickly. I'll try and make that available in the description. So to kick us off, I play this build with a one-hand and off-hand when possible. You can play it with a two-hand, and I have put options on this page for it, but yeah, the weapon in the offhand allows you to have an extra aspect and some additional stats. If you're getting a one hand, you should try and get an axe. The reason being is that the enemy modifier on the weapon type is better, so it'll be like damage to healthy enemies essentially. And then yeah, you want to prioritize high damage, vulnerable damage, core skill damage, crit strike, and so on. It's going to be kind of key. A lot of the stats are going to be the same. I won't go through super in depth, just for like keeping the duration of the video down. Obviously you can see them on the screen. I'll try and call out some of the more unique stuff. In terms of the aspects for the one hand, I'm recommending Runeworker's Conduit aspect here. And for the offhand, I've put Lightning Dancer's aspect. I've also added the Mighty Storms aspect. That is the one that I spoke about a little bit in the skills section of the video, where we discussed whether people would want to play with Earth and Might. So I've put that there as, if you are going to try that out, putting it on your offhand probably makes the most sense. And again, we're prioritizing high damage, but you can get cooldown reduction on offhands, which is quite a rare stat and a pretty powerful one, so worth picking up. So if you're going with a two-hand, you're going to want to try and get a staff for the damage to crowd-controlled enemies modifier. And yeah, I'm recommending Lightning Dancer's aspect again. For the helm, I'm suggesting Aspect of Mending Stone. Since we're not using Tempest Roar with this build, we get the option of basically having the legendary and getting the more idealized stats. So again, the helm is one of those items that we can get cooldown reduction on, so I'm suggesting that we take that first, and then maximum life, percentage of total armor, willpower, and barrier generation. Essentially, with the helm, the chest, and the legs, we really want to try and use those slots for getting as much defense and survivability as possible, and that will just help us as we move towards the harder dungeon content. For the chest, I've put two options here. I quite like playing with Aspect of Might, because it basically means that my Storm Strike is going to grant me damage reduction from this aspect, and then obviously we spoke about the fact that it's already doing that in the skills, so you're kind of getting that double up there. I think that I just think it's good to keep that up, just basically mixing in a few basic attacks every now and again, just to make you more survivable, to increase your survivability, let's say. For another option, you could take Aspect of the Protector, which just means every time you damage an elite, you get a barrier. I think most classes are familiar with that one. It's quite a common one for all classes. And then we're gonna, look to stat-wise, we're gonna look to prioritize damage reduction whilst fortified, damage reduction against close enemies, distant enemies, armor, life, etc. For the gloves, I've put two options here. Again, I've got Aspect of the Expectant. That mixes quite well if you're mixing in the basic skills for the survivability, for the extra damage reduction. Then you can also increase the damage of your next core skill, which would be your Lightning Storm in this case. I quite liked that when I was playing with it, but if you're not into that one, then Accelerating Aspect is good. So that's just crit strikes with your core skills and increase your attack speed. It's a pretty obvious one. For the gloves, we want to be prioritizing ranks to Lightning Storm here. This is the slot where that's possible, so you don't really want to miss that. And also we can pick up lucky hit chance here, so the build is quite lucky hit chance centric, so you want to try and grab that where possible as well. For the legs, I would take Aspect of Disobedience. It's just a good survivable aspect. I think all classes are using this, to be honest. And then you're going to want to prioritize the defensive stats, much like the chest. For the boots, Ghostwalker's aspect is nice. Just gives you extra movement speed. Movement speed is one of the areas that this build is lacking, honestly. It doesn't have a movement skill like Trample, and we don't have the benefit of turning into a werewolf with all the extra werewolf speed. So for the boots specifically, I'm taking the aspect for the extra movement speed, but I'm also prioritizing movement speed as the number one stat to pick up. And it's also why I've put movement speed after killing an elite a bit higher than maybe some other people might. If you were playing the werewolf build and in need of less speed, then you might have that, less of a priority. In terms of the implicit, honestly, any of these work. I quite like movement speed after evade, but it's really personal preference. I've played with all three; they're all great. Use whichever one you like best, honestly. Now for the amulet and rings, you'll see that for amulet and ring 1, I've called out the same aspects. The reason I've done this is because you get a different, you get an increase for having them on the amulet versus the rings. So for example, if you compare aspect of retaliation here, your core skills deal up to 30 to 60% damage, increased damage. If you put that same thing on the ring, it's only going to be 20 to 40. Similarly with overcharge, we're looking at 15 to 30 or 10 to 20. Now, my preference would be to have retaliation on the amulet for the 30 to 60% increase, and then overcharge on the ring, but honestly, either way around, depending on your preference, is fine. For the amulet, again, we can get cooldown reduction on that piece, so I would look to prioritize that, as well as spirit cost reduction. Survivability stats, much like the other pieces. Ranks to Nature's Reach is a decent one to pick up here, so not bad. And then movement speed for the same reasons as before. In terms of the rings, the stats are the same. We're looking to pick up Lucky Hit here. That's probably the main thing to call out that isn't different to our general stat priority. As I say, for ring 1, I would probably look to put Overcharged on, provided that you're using Retaliation on your neck. And for ring 2, so I think the logical choice is to take Aspect of the Umbral. I never had a good roll. I only had the one from the dungeon in Dry Steps, so that's only one primary resource, so I wasn't really using it. I think if I could get one that had a 4 primary resource on it, then I probably would use it. But honestly, I was having quite a lot of fun with this aspect, which honestly feels like a bit of a bait, because it makes you stand still, which I think probably if you're looking to push really hardcore dungeons later on, it's probably not the best idea. But you'll see in this video I've got a clip where I'm standing relatively still and just dealing lots of damage to an entire room, and just kind of moving out of, whatever I need to on the floor or whatever. But yeah, essentially, the longer you stand still, the better this gets. You can get up to 30% damage extra. I think on my character that was taking me from like 6.5 or 6.6k attack power to 8.2 if I stood still for the entire duration. And I was only using the one from the dungeon again, so it was only the 5%. Obviously, if I could get the 10%, it would just stack a lot faster. So I quite enjoyed that one. As I say, I'm not sure I can wholeheartedly recommend it as the best choice, but I liked it. It was fun. And then on the rings, yeah, Lucky Hit, as I kind of called out earlier. But yeah, I think that's it for this. So I said I'd show you a little bit of gameplay where we clear out a whole room. I'm actually starting with an elite here. You can see I pop Cataclysm straight away. But yeah, we're going to get through this next room and we're going to end up at a cursed shrine, or I think it's actually a cursed health well. Yeah, it's just on the other side of this. The dungeon specifically was a bit annoying because I had the lightning storm thing that I kept having to move to stand in. But you'll also see that I'm quite static a lot of the time, and I'm building those stacks of the inner calm aspect that I kind of just talked about. But yeah, you'll see that even though these mobs are 17 levels higher than me, we're just dominating this room, right? Like, they're getting stunned, crowd controlled as soon as they spawn, and most of the time they're dead before their animation even finishes. It's honestly a lot of fun just wiping out entire rooms with this build. And if you're in a dungeon that's much closer to your own level, typically if you're just leveling, you'll be looking to do dungeons where the mobs are 3 levels higher than you, because that's where you get the best XP ratio to time spent. As you can see, I'm not struggling with this room as it is, so when the mobs are like 3 levels higher than me, we just absolutely destroy them. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I hope you all have a good time with it. I'd love to hear about it if you do. Thanks.